Hello, and welcome to day 12. Today we're going to talk about dopamine, what it is, how your brain gets it, and why we usually get it from all the wrong places. Dopamine is just one of hundreds, if not thousands, of neurotransmitters running around in your brain telling you what to do. Dopamine gets the most press because it's most closely associated with pleasure and motivating you to do certain things, to get out of bed, to move towards a certain object, to do pretty much anything. But in reality, dopamine is a pleasure chemical, but it's more a desire chemical. It's more about craving, wanting more of something. Its main facet is pay attention, this is important for your survival, do more of it. So our ancestors, anytime they ate food, they got dopamine. Anytime they exercise, meaning running away from a predator or running towards prey, because that was important for their survival, they got dopamine. But in today's world, there's many ways that we can get dopamine synthetically. Companies have been very good at creating these sources of dopamine. That could be from high-calorie foods, that could be from your smartphone, that could be from social media. Anytime that we get information that kind of mimics what we used to get dopamine from in the past, say social information, then our brain will give us a dopamine buzz. But this synthetic version that we're getting nowadays is somewhat hollow. It doesn't go anywhere. It's kind of like getting dopamine without earning it. So there's no kind of great outcome in the long run for us. Our brain still thinks it's important to our survival, so it keeps doing more and more of it. But there's really a magnitude issue here. Say for instance you do what is most pleasurable to humans being naturally, which is sex. That rates at like a 200 on a pleasure scale, on a dopamine scale. But say you take something like methamphetamine, that rates at 990 on a dopamine scale. So you start to see the problem here, is that our synthetic sources are much more potent than our natural sources. So our brain doesn't really know the difference. We consciously do, but our brain just thinks we're getting this great source of pleasure, and it wants to do more and more and more of it. So our brain gets hijacked by TV, beer, high-calorie food. Even things that don't have a high potent dose like methamphetamine, if you do something long enough and often enough and it gives you dopamine, your brain kind of puts that to the top of the list. And you start to kind of forget about things that used to make you happy, such as hanging out with other people, exercise, being around, kind of doing your hobbies. All these things kind of get pushed to the side, and they really call this an addiction, where you put your kind of synthetic pleasures above the natural pleasures. And they call addiction a disease of disconnection. But it doesn't have to be just a physiological addiction, it could be a psychological addiction. And all of us have the capability of having a psychological addiction to a synthetic source of dopamine. And I know you might think you're the one person who doesn't, but just take into consideration that most Americans check their phones 185 times per day. A third of the U.S. is severely obese, and opiate addiction kills more people every year than the whole Vietnam War combined. Because as a species, we're always going to get dopamine from somewhere. If we're not getting it from friends, we're going to get it from our smartphones. There's one interesting study done about flies. And what they did with the flies, they gave these flies sources of dopamine, such as having sex with their mates. But if they didn't have access to that, and they had access to a little kind of like puddle of beer over here, they would drink 4 times the amount of beer just to get that dopamine. So whether you're a fly or a human, you're always searching out dopamine. You're going to get it from somewhere. So if you're not getting it from exercise, your friends, or healthy ways like through sex, then you're going to find it through some other way. So just question where you're getting your dopamine from, and make sure that you're not kind of creating a psychological addiction that can kind of become your master. I define addiction as doing something outside of yourself to make you feel safe. And that could be just checking your smartphone or going to watch Netflix instead of, putting yourself out there and going to a gathering with other people. I know it's the easier, more predictable option, but it has destructive kind of bad endings in the long run. So try to be smarter than your brain. And I know it's going to be hard because these things are so tempting. But our bodies are just a chemistry set, and you need to start understanding your chemistry set a little bit better. And dopamine is one of the main chemicals that is in that chemistry set that motivates you to go forward and do something. So just make sure you're getting your dopamine from the right sources. So that's what we're going to do for our self-reflection today, is look at those synthetic sources of dopamine and where we kind of fit on that addiction scale if we're letting it get a little out of hand. But that's all I have for today. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.